She talks, so what am I worried about?
Okay, well, it's recording now, so whenever you're ready.
Okay, great, Amber. Thanks.
I will cut off the first half.
Perfect.
The first thing.
Okay, today we're going to talk about good science learning and teaching.
Okay, what is that?
Well, there are different parts of good science learning and teaching. One of them is nurturing student curiosity, which I think is very important because it engages your students a lot. And that's what we need. We need to encourage our kids to want to learn science or how to, bring what they have in their own world into what science truly is.
Well, yeah, I think that's the thing that, this year, having the experience of teaching science, watching them make those connections, is engaging them. Now that they can make those connections and see that there's things happening in their lives and be able to understand that they came in with questions, they came in wanting to know, and having the time to focus on science helped.
Well, and this was new for us this year. Because we'd have just a couple of weeks normally with science each term. We've never had science full time in our district that I can remember.
No.
So having our kids have, 80 minutes? 80-minute blocks?
80-minute block or 2 40-minute blocks. But 80 week? Minutes, yeah.
That's more than we've ever had.
No, and I think it's something that even teachers and students, some of the older kids, noticed, hey, we're actually getting to do science now.
Right.
We're getting to spend time. They wanted to do experiments. They wanted to understand how things were working and everything. But even teachers understood, hey, these kids are actually getting science now.
Right.
It's not just a small... it's not just something small that they can add in when they get a chance or the couple weeks out of a term.
Right.
They're getting it weekly.
Because when I was in second grade the year before last, it was literally 2 weeks that we did a unit. And it was just something very small and very quick out of mystery science. Because the time wasn't built in.
Yeah.
To get a full science curriculum in.
And I think that's really great of what U46 did in pulling that out, because you can look at it as, oh my goodness, it's another special, it's another this, they're only getting it once a week, or for the kids that did get the split of 40 and 40, they did have science class twice a week, but that's more than they were getting, and that's what you have to look at it as, is we were able to cover how many units? I can say that they covered 4 to 6 or 3 or 4 units a trimester.
Yeah.
Because there's the 3 trimesters, and at minimum, I think one grade had 2, but it was a really big unit and a smaller unit.
Longer, many more days, yeah.
But we were able to go into it and break it up into the 5 E's. We introduced the topic. We engaged, we did the explain, engage, explore, all of those pieces. We were able to take time and spend a whole day on one of those things. So I think that it gave them the chance to immerse themselves in science when they were with
for sure
their
and
teachers.
That's part of the good science learning and teaching, is developing scientific literacy. They were able to communicate in science terms and understand what they mean.
Yeah. I think I saw that a lot, and I know it's probably different from the conversations that you were able to have, but truly seeing the kids at the beginning of the year and how they are able to pull out evidence, pull out reasoning from things we did. By the end of the year, yes, we're still prompting and we're still trying to figure out how to word these things and going through that teaching process, but they got it. They knew what words to use. They knew what they were looking for and how they needed to scientifically explain it.
Yeah.
So they knew when we read it and it said scientific explanation, they knew, okay, I can't just the ground is wet because I see water. Like, they had to go in depth. What made it wet?
Right.
How do they know that? What does that mean? What are we looking at?
Yeah, and for me, I'm just on the complete opposite spectrum. Where with special ed, I would say probably 90% of my kids are nonverbal. So my version of communicating with them, I communicate with them, and a lot of them can communicate through their talkers, but that's only in my independent learning classes. My EN classes, it was just such a different situation where, I could introduce things, but everything that I would do, I wouldn't be doing a CER. I wouldn't be going through all the steps that you would go through in a gen ed classroom.
Yeah.
I could do a little bit more in my ILP classes, but it was just completely different. I was lucky enough, though, to sit with the other science teachers, and it was fun to hear all their feedback and the things that they got to see from their students, and even the experiments. Like, we could do some experiments, but most of them I couldn't because, well, they put it in their mouth or they tried to eat it, or so it really wasn't feasible for me to do it the way you guys got to.
I mean, I will say hands-on experiments in general with kids at the beginning of the year, it was hard. They're going to put it in their mouth. They're going to do this because they didn't have that experience.
Right.
One, but two,
ever really.
Exactly. They're learning. But I think that's where you can tie in the idea of the teacher facilitation. Like, how do we effectively teach good science? What is our role in that? Because my role at the beginning of the year to my role at the end of the year, drastically different.
Sure. And I think that with the hands-on experiments, that is so engaging, and that's where you really, to me, that's where you get the buy-in, because they get to try it. And especially when you have visual learners. I'm a visual learner. I could read all day long, but sometimes if I don't get to visually see something happen, or, it doesn't register right away.
Yes.
So I have to imagine that as your year progressed, them being engaged and being excited about what the next experiment would be.
And I want to take, like, just the word experiments, I think, is... You have a conception of what an experiment really is, but there was times where I had a group that absolutely loved to play the mouse game.
Mm-hmm.
And it was just simply them understanding environmental changes. What did that look like? If a road was built, or if a bunch of trees fell down, what did that look like? To them, it was a game. They pulled what they needed from that game, but they looked forward to playing that game. And I said, hey, if we play the game, we have to have the conversations afterwards. And they're like, well, yeah, of course we do. And it's like they knew what it meant. 2 units later, they still wanted to do that because to them that was fun. They were actually learning something. They were understanding it. And they were able to connect it back to other things as well from that one activity.
And that's huge, that they can make connections outside of science.
Yes.
Because that's a huge part of it. It's not just science. It's what's, I'll say, in the outside world. How can we start to make connections?
Yeah.
Because there are so many connections that can be made, and I mean, I don't know, there's so many, I feel like, good strategies as teachers that we can use to help encourage our students and engage them and want them to, really get excited about it.
Well, I think that pulls in, favorite word that we've heard all semester is effortful thinking.
Oh, for sure.
How are they processing these things?
Yes.
How are they thinking about it? What does this really mean to them? I mean, I know I've mentioned it before, like joking around with the kids, like when they see something and they're like, science. And it's like, okay, but why is it science? How is it science?
That's cool.
How can you explain it beyond just being able to recognize that there might be some scientific background behind it, but let's ask the questions. Inquiry-based learning, that same idea of they see something, ask the question now.
Yep.
Encourage them to ask the question.
Yeah.
Be like, okay, well, what are we thinking about? Why? what's going on with this? What happens if we make this change?
Yeah.
Can we do this? You know, I had first graders that were playing with flashlights. That was their favorite thing when we did our light unit. Can you see the flashlight through this? Will it go through this? How many pieces of paper can I put in front of it before I can't see it? Their favorite books, clothing, all of these different items, and just watching them go through that process and just sit there. And I had some kids that were like, Ms. Hammer, you're not saying anything.
Because you don't need to.
I don't need to.
Yeah.
I said, talk to your friends.
Yeah.
Like, communicate with each other. Build that sense of environment. Build that sense of community through this activity.
Well, and they've learned to collaborate with each other. And that's the point where you want it to get to, is that you're just there to help guide if necessary. They can take the lead on these things. And that to me is effective teaching, where you can lay out the groundwork and work towards that point of where our students are able to say, we got it.
Yeah.
You can sit back and observe them and guide when necessary.
And I think I truly struggled with that at the beginning of the year, because it's that whole idea of, one, I was worried if I gave them too much freedom, what would happen?
Yeah.
Are they actually getting something out of this?
Right.
But then by the end of the year, it was that, like, I'm just sitting here sometimes. Like, I'm able to truly see them research, ask questions, collaborate with each other. If they can't figure something out, go about it a different way. Change something. If they needed more supplies, or like by 4th, 5th, 6th grade, like the questions they were asking each other when they were doing activities were crazy. And it's like, I don't think I would have seen myself giving them as much freedom.
Right.
But I also think science was a great example of that. And like this idea of letting them do that, letting them have that freedom is beyond helpful, because you see what they actually can do.
For sure.
Whereas maybe that's the point of science, like compared to other subjects, reading, math, like you see, like you can only let go so much in those.
I understand that. Yeah.
So seeing it in science was completely different in how they were able to, even if they went down a different path, somehow it all circled back together. Yeah. Somehow it all made sense.
Yeah. And for me, I can think of one particular unit that stands out the most, and it was sound. And all of my students can hear. You know, they can't respond to me without their talker. Sometimes they just don't respond at all. But I could see it in their faces when they're listening to the video, or they're starting to understand a little bit more about the sound. When I brought in the tuning fork, that was probably the best thing I could have ever done. I could have done that for probably 3 or 4 days at a time, because they were so fascinated by the sound, the vibration, the feel of it, how it sounds on different objects. So even my nonverbal children in EN, that's when I had captured their curiosity. That's when they were the most engaged, because it was something that they could do, they could feel it, and they could hear it. So for me, that was an exciting unit. And even with my ILP kids that are the 3rd through 6th graders, we could have genuine conversations, and they would ask great questions, so we could spend a little more time with any unit. But in regards to sound, it wasn't like I'd be sitting there with like manipulatives with them.
Yeah. We
could go through things. They were high level. They could read, they can write, they can answer questions. A few of them couldn't, but out of 7, I think 4 of them really were able to stand on their own for the most part. Yeah. But it was the small moments that you could see, and it's just so different. It's different going into a classroom where most of your students don't talk. If they do, it's very few words. Yeah. I know they understand it, but it's a very different situation where, I have to pick up on their cues to see what they are understanding or what they're not understanding. And, I'd say midway through, I could start to see whether or not they were understanding, or I could understand the cues of them going, like, I just don't get it.
Yeah.
And that just, it went beyond the manipulatives that I would use, but you could almost feel the frustration that they just couldn't answer the questions.
Yeah. I mean, that kind of, I think, leads into another thing that's like super important to good science, teaching, learning, all of the pieces of equity and inclusion. How can you turn science into something that reaches all of them?
That's a great question. I mean, it's hard, right? So this year, we both worked for U46. So for you, everything was provided through STEM scopes. You had the materials, you had the handouts, you had pretty much everything that you needed.
Yes.
So for me, yes, I had STEM scopes, I had the materials, I had everything that you had, but there was nothing that was adapted for my kids.
Yeah.
At all. So for sound, let's take an example, or even our plant unit when we planted seeds.
Yeah.
I had to say, okay, so this is what we're going to cover over the next 10 days. How can I break it down?
Yeah.
And how can I make it so they, 1, participate, 2, they get hands-on, and 3, that they're going to understand. So for me, I would take the unit and be like, okay, break it down into days, how long each thing would take.
Yeah.
Then I would have to go and find things to adapt to it. And TPT became like my best friend.
Yeah.
Twinkle a little bit, but that's where I was really able to find things that I could adapt for my kids.
Yeah.
And then it was, yes, a lot of things for at least EN and maybe even my ILP kids, the lower kids, grade 1, we did a lot of manipulatives because not everybody's at the same level.
Right.
But that was how I could see. So in the beginning, even a manipulative, and I wanted them to match, I would have to color code them at first. So we color code. Once we got past color coding, then I would go down to 1 color instead of 2 colors to match. Then as we moved on, I would take all colors off.
Yeah.
And sometimes, and most of the times our manipulatives needed to be in color, but I would still put a dot on it to see, so they could see. So this plant matches this plant. So that would be colored 2 red dots. That kind of a situation. But as we moved through the year, I would do the color manipulative, and then I would do a black and white. And you could see complete difference. Where in the beginning, if I were to give them a black and white manipulative, there's just no connection.
Yeah.
At all. They couldn't visually make the connection. Where if I had the 2 colored pictures up and I said, okay, so these are the parts of the plant. Can you tell me which one is the stem? Pick the one that's the stem and put it over here. I mean, a lot of it's hand over hand, but, and it's different. It's an interesting thing sitting down with a nonverbal student. You have the manipulative, you have their talker, and then you're trying to figure out where everything is on the talker.
Yeah.
And that's one thing that I should say as, to be inclusive. In my position, I wish I would have had a talker that I could communicate, even though I'm verbal with them.
Yeah.
At least I would know where everything is instead of bumbling all the time.
And that's what I feel like within Gen Ed, there's still that level of the kids who are in a 4th grade class that might not always be at 4th grade level.
Sure.
Reading, writing.
Those talkers would be amazing.
Yes. And it's just as something as easy as there was I had one class where I knew I had some kids that really needed supports when we were writing things or when we were going through reading. So yes, was the idea for me to focus on vocabulary or words? No, but I knew to prep that ahead of time. Okay, hey, you guys are going to do this reading and then you're going to answer some questions. Here are some keywords that we need to be looking for. Or, maybe I had some students who writing was not it for them.
Yeah.
Like they, spelling and just their ability to write wasn't there. So having to do verbal worksheets with them. So it wasn't about them actually physically being able to do that, but me meeting them halfway. Okay, get everyone else set up, get everyone else ready. I need to work one-on-one with them.
Yeah. And that's the hard part, right? So at least I have paras in all of my classes. And, another challenging part of that is it's like you have to go through and sit with your paras really quick, or at least try to talk to them and be like, this is what we're going to cover today. This is what the manipulative looks like. This is what I want you to try to get through with them. But then when I need to assess them, I need to go one by one.
Yeah.
So I can get that. So it's this really, it's a hard balancing act to the help is fantastic. Like I couldn't do what I did this year unless I had the paras.
Yeah.
We're in self-contained classrooms for a reason.
Right.
So it's so incredibly helpful. And, the other thing I just thought about too is, yes, we had STEM scopes, but I don't even think you knew this. We have this program in special ed called ULS, Unique Learning System. So they have under Unique Learning System, it comes in like stages. So it's like month by month you get a new stage, but you still have your social studies, your science, your math, your reading. So what I would do is try to work with the teachers to see if I could line up what I was doing and see if ULS was at the same time. So I would maneuver things around sometimes instead of following directly, because it just made more sense.
Yeah.
So I would go into ULS and say, okay, is there anything in ULS that I can pull?
Yeah.
And then pull from my STEM scopes. Even just talking to the other science teachers. I mean, they had never done special ed either, but it was great because they were able to provide me with just ideas that were so simple that in my mind, I was like, are you sure that they're not going to eat that? Or they're not going to try to drink that? And they didn't, but I had to do the work and they watched.
Yeah.
Which is okay. Yeah. I know that they got something out of it that way.
Well, and I think that you mentioned, like, when you were talking about that, like, when you were assessing them, it really was a one-on-one process.
Absolutely.
Doing any type of assessment, that was also a really, like, challenging part for me.
Yes.
In the teaching idea of good science, because how do you assess them? How, when all of them are doing an activity, or all of them are having a science talk, or all of them are answering questions, how do you assess that? How do you do those informal assessments? I know it probably looked like you had to do the one-on-ones, but like I was assessing my students in everything they did. Right. Our kind of guidelines were, hey, here's your rubric for the unit or the topic. As soon as they hit it, it was boom, they have a 4 or they have a 3. It's wherever they were at. But it's like, I'd have kids that would answer really great questions when we were in the explore stage. Mm-hmm. But when it came time for them to explain everything we just did, it was like, whoosh, where did it all go?
Oh, for sure.
And then it was that whole idea of prompting without prompting them.
Yeah.
Of like
that little nudge.
That little nudge of like, do you remember what we did? How can we make that a connection? How can we turn that into a comprehensive thought of science? And I think that's even the part that I still struggled with the year ending was, how do you pull that all together? How do you really take all of these pieces? Because I feel like assessments is kind of like the end all be all of things. Like, you can check off the boxes as much as you want, but that assessment's the proof that you did all of these things.
Right.
So how do you pull it all together? Yeah. How can someone else come in and look at it and say, they did these things. The kids did a hands-on activity that showed them what they were doing. You can see that they were asking their own questions and how did they document and how did these things? Because I think it's really hard, like outside looking in, to see all of these pieces or to prove that you're doing all of these pieces when someone's not there watching everything happen.
And that's the hardest part, right? Like, I can say there's a couple times that the principal walked in And we were in the middle of a transition point of it, and I could just feel it. I could feel him thinking, she's not doing anything. But well knowing I was doing everything that I was following along what I needed to do.
Right.
And it's like I said, I know I could say it 100 times. It's so different for us.
Yes.
You know, with my ILP kids, the 3rd through 6th, I would always ask them, or we would talk about something. We would do them in small sections. And then I would stop and I would ask questions. And I knew if they could answer them, they were truly getting what I was saying. And for the most part, the 4 core kids could answer my questions.
Yeah.
So I knew, but when it came down to assessments, I couldn't assess the way you could.
Yeah.
I had to come up with my own assessments. I mean, that would basically fit into what they needed to be.
Yeah.
Like you would be putting in more grades compared to what I would be doing. Like,
oh yeah, it was a constant, because like I said, the whole idea of taking the 5 E's in a lesson, that concept was so crazy to me, because I was doing 5 E's over 10 to 14 days
for
at some
sure.
point. I mean, there was a couple units that were 28-day units where we were hitting all 5 of these things in 28 days.
Yeah.
So I was assessing as we went. It was a comprehensive assessment. It wasn't just, can you answer my questions at the end? It was, were you engaged? Were you answering questions? Were you asking questions?
Yeah.
Were you participating in these explore activities? Were you able to answer a CER or have a good science talk about this when we sat down and did it?
Yeah.
And I just feel like it was, for me to stretch something out over 28 days was so long, but also it gave me the data I needed to say, this kid gets it or this kid doesn't get it.
Yep. Yeah.
Whereas I feel like there were sometimes we would talk and you'd be like, I did this in 2 days, because if I don't, it draws out, and it's, how do you get that data?
Right.
How do you assess when it's taking forever?
Well, and in all reality, there were some days, literally, it was a CoComelon day because we couldn't regulate students. Mondays were particularly hard, especially in the beginning or when you come back from a break or a long weekend. There were days, it was a handful, not an obscene amount, but literally days where we're like, this is not working today. There was nothing that I could do to change where they were at. They were just so dysregulated that I was like, okay. And that's when I would say to the parents, what is their favorite thing to watch? One class was like CoComelon, one like Storybots, but whatever it was a quick switch to, this is what we're going to do today. Yeah. And that's just, it is what it is. But I also know that I can go ahead and still squeeze in everything that I need to squeeze in. And it never really was a squeeze.
Yeah.
But for me, those were my assessments, right?
Yeah.
So I'd have my introduction, we'd go through it, they'd see some videos, and then I would do different worksheets or manipulatives with them. And then it came time to, can they do the manipulative? Yeah. So that's how I would assess. But for the 3rd trimester, that's when the pushing started. I started to say, okay, I know that I've got a chunk of kids, even in EN, that can handle worksheets now. Yeah. Because I started that more at the end of semester 2. So then it's doing worksheets. A lot of worksheets, less manipulatives. Yeah. I still would have to work with them, but I could see they were getting it. Yeah. They could finally start to, my younger ILP kids, I would have to, hand over hand or work with them or have the words above where they could pick. But they were truly finally doing the work. It's not like the manipulatives, they weren't doing the work, but this was a different kind of work. Yeah. And you could see the difference from the start of the school year to the end of the school year, just with the new words they could say. when they could even say my name. I won a kid in EN when he learned how to finally say my name. I mean, to me,
Yeah.
that might have been the best day ever. And when I would walk in, I'd see him 3 times a week. He would say, point to his thing, push, Miss Kira's here. But then he would say it.
Yeah.
To me, that was a win.
Yeah.
You know? So the small things were total wins because I knew that I was reaching them somehow and that they were engaged for the most part.
And I can say that I definitely think that even I had those days where there was sometimes we would be in the middle of something and I used to tell, I had a couple classes that were notorious for this. I would get this look.
Blank.
Nothing. Just stares. Mouth open, blinking at me. And I'd be like, something.
Anybody, please.
Right. But then it reached a point where a couple times it was, okay, I would literally turn the screen off and I would be like, I need everyone to look at me. What is holding us up right now? Are we just tired? Are we just having a day?
Yeah.
Be honest. Do we not get it? Is it maybe not our favorite topic right now? What is the reason for us? And I think that helped, one, in just the idea of teaching.
Mm-hmm.
But I think a lot of times the answer I would get was they just weren't interested in how we were learning about it. So that's when I was able to take their questions and I would say, okay, I'll give it to you. What we're reading or the activity we're supposed to be doing isn't it. What do you want to do?
Yeah.
Around this question. Our question is not changing. We have to learn this topic. You have to be assessed on this topic. I was honest with them. We have to hit these points. But how do you want to hit these points? And I think that even opened this up more for me.
Yeah.
Because I realized even with that freedom, they still made the choice to do what they needed to do.
Right.
They just did it a little differently, or they did it to their level, but still gave the answers that they needed.
But they learned it, right?
Yes.
In a different way. And I think sometimes, yes, it's important to follow the structure and everything the way you're supposed to do it. But I think sometimes there needs to be that give and take in teaching and in learning. And if there's a different way besides the way that it is laid out, then I think you need to do that as a teacher, because that gives your students the ability to really show how they can learn it best.
Oh, I think the best example is when it was in winter, it was snowing, and 5th grade was talking about properties, and they were talking about water and the properties of water. So I was like, time out, freeze, stand up, let's go outside. We all got a cup of snow. We brought it back inside. And I mean, I still have the pictures to like the joy on their face of just watching a cup of snow melt. Because it was crazy because, we got to go outside. We got to play in the snow for a minute. But it was still them saying like, okay, my full cup of snow is now half a cup of water. And then we got into what happens if we pack the snow? Does that make a difference? Is it going to melt faster? Is it going to melt slower? Yeah. You have stuff in your snow. What happens if I add water to it? And I had no idea where this was going to go. I had this completely different idea of what grabbing a handful of snow outside was going to do. But then it was like, the snow melted. The next day I had a different group of 5th graders and they were like, we don't get to play in the snow. And I was like, snow melted? I'm so sorry. But just that whole idea of letting them kind of lead once we got into those topics. And I think that's what's drawn me to the older grades, which I was very shocked from. But just that whole idea of when they do have the freedom to learn how they want, they will surprise you.
And I think that's a full circle moment for anybody, right? Like, I did not set off to do special education this year. That was not on my bingo card. But my bingo card changed very quickly.
Teaching science to dual language students was not on mine.
Right.
But the kid who probably loved me the most barely spoke any English. By the end of the year, he was telling me, have a great weekend. I'll see you tomorrow.
Yeah.
Do we have class today? Yes, it was short sentences, but he looked forward to maybe just me, or maybe it was the science, because he also would have questions.
Well, maybe it was the connection that you made with him. Like, I know that it was more than me just going in and teaching them science.
Yes.
I had to build a relationship and make a connection with them first, because you can't just walk into a special education class and be like, hi, I'm Miss Kira, because you don't get up at the front of the room really and teach, because it's just not the way it works with a self-contained, mostly behavioral kids.
Right.
It doesn't flow that way.
Yes.
But I had to create those bonds and those relationships, and to get them to a point where they would make eye contact with me. They'd look at it and they would look at me and then point, is that right? So we had that relationship, that bond. And that was when I was like, okay.
Yeah.
This is good. This is the way it should be. Even on my hardest days, whether I would get bit or pinched or punched, you know what? I looked past that.
Yeah.
Because yes, they understand, and some of them are so incredibly intelligent. They don't know how to get it from here to here sometimes. But I looked at it completely so different from when I walked in. Yeah. Like, I was terrified. I was like, I can't do this. Like, I don't think I am well equipped as a human being to be that patient. I was wrong. I was so wrong. And these little kids, they just sucked me in, every single one of them. Bad, rough day, didn't matter.
Yeah.
I loved them. And I loved watching them grow and learn. And I mean, really, let's be honest. We learned together.
It's funny you say that, because the whole time you're talking, in the back of my head, I'm thinking my biggest fear going into this was not the same, in the sense that, like, yes, it was to go in and make those connections, but I have 20, 25 kids in some classes, and you're teaching a topic that in certain areas are not going to be it for some kids.
No.
They don't want it. And I can honestly say, you could probably go ask any student I taught this year. There were some days I'd be like, I know this is not what you want to learn, but how can we work together to do that?
Yeah.
And I think that was my biggest thing out of the years. I was honest. I was like, some of this I'm learning right with you, but you're a teacher. It doesn't matter.
It doesn't matter.
Like, we are learning together.
Yes.
We are understanding it together. We are going through these processes together. I got to understand what was interesting to them. They got to understand what was interesting to me. The amount of topics we related back to dinosaurs would blow your mind, because they knew that was what was interesting to me.
But they were engaged. And they were communicating.
Exactly.
And I bet they could relate to real world things.
Right. And, when we were doing other activities, they would be like, oh, like, our last unit kind of towards the end of the year was recycling and the earth for a lot of them. Even the younger kids were talking about, like, oh, that has to go in the blue trash can. Or, oh, this has, like, my 5th grade classes were fighting over who got to walk around the school and clean up trash.
But you used the manipulative to a different way that I use for my kids.
You were telling me about the manipulative you used, where it had the different types of...
It had
glass, paper, plastic.
Yes, there's 4 different garbage bins.
I used that with my kinder and 1st graders, where they were able to, as a unit, like, go up there and decide, where does this piece go?
Yeah.
So we would lay them all out, and they would go find them, and they would match together. If they didn't know, they would ask each other for help. And it was just kind of this whole game. And they were so sad when I had to, like, I didn't have any more. We were able to play it like 2 or 3 times, but they were like, what do you mean there's no more? Can you make more? And I was like, well, let's go find some things in the classroom. We walked the halls. We're like, okay, can this be recycled? Can this be recycled?
Yes.
And it's just that idea of them, like, pulling it back to what they're doing and their world and how are they engaged in this.
Yeah.
They started asking questions, and I think it just, again, it's that whole tie-in of, I spent this year like worrying if they were getting it,
Mm-hmm.
but there's some days where I would walk out of there and be like, I did my job. They got it.
Yeah.
They did it.
Yeah.
So, I mean, to me, learning about good science learning and teaching now, at the end of doing science, validates me a little bit in the sense that I feel like I was hitting some of these points. Maybe not to the best ability, but I think it was, again, something of me learning how to do these things and hitting them.
Yeah.
And understanding how it worked. And where can I go from here?
Yeah. There was one situation where I was at 3 schools, so that alone was a challenge. But at this particular school, it was the 3 through 6 ILP, the independent learning class. And these kids were, the 4 of them out of the 7 were much higher learners. I think even there are a few that are working towards transitioning into gen ed, which I think is fantastic. But we did a whole unit on butterflies, and the teacher was able to order butterflies. So we started from day 1 of butterflies till the day we let them go. And so one of the most rewarding parts of even that class was only a couple of the butterflies died through the process, but we were able to go outside and I was able to have each kid put their hand in, and they were able to wait for a butterfly to go onto their finger, and they would pull it out, and the butterflies for the most part would stay for each of the kids, and they could look at them close up and look at the wings and the legs, and even one was able to kind of just touch it a little bit. So some of them, they sat with their butterflies for quite some time before they flew off.
Yeah.
And that was pretty cool. I mean, to see something from the start to the finish, I could see how much they had learned and how engaged they were, because it was a different type of experiment for them.
Yeah.
To watch and see how it changed and what did it eat.
Yeah.
They liked that part because there's always a little piece of watermelon in their little thing. But I would just say this has been so rewarding, challenging, rewarding, but you can see how good science and learning and teaching are so important.
Yes.
And how you can verbal, nonverbal, still relate it
Yes.
to so many things in their outside world.
Yes. And how they grasp it through different stages.
Yeah. Yeah, it's really kind of cool.
Yeah.
All right. Well, Amber, nailed it.